Today, I will play as this backward feudal Japan in the year 1836, and I will show you step by step how to turn these 29 million dissatisfied Japanese peasants into a thriving industrial and commercial empire. The most powerful in the world, no less. Let's begin. Welcome imperialists, Lucas here. The Japanese shogunate is definitely one of the best countries for beginners. For a very simple reason. One mistake and your country will explode, so you'll have to start all over again. I know I've made quite a few videos about Japan, but this country has changed so much lately, and the strategies for it as well, that it's basically necessary to record a new guide. To that end, I also spent several hours watching materials from the biggest Victoria creators on YouTube in order to combine the best elements of the strategies they present and find out what doesn't work. For example, provoking a civil war to get rid of the shogunate. Because it has such huge influence in Japan, it can spark rebellions even in your capital, so disbanding your army in other regions won't work anymore. Or a quick war with Great Britain, which for winning it demands that we open our markets to foreign trade. Nowadays, Great Britain mostly demands only a port. But don't worry, within 10 years, one of the great powers will attack you anyway to force you to open your market. Instead, I'll try to start a war against China. This may go either way, as the outcome depends on randomness. If you succeed in this war, let me know what strategy you used. Currently, Japan is one of the most literate countries in the world, literally the third most literate. Probably because of those books with pictures. I must admit, reading them is a challenge. But in reality, this stems from the fact that Japan begins with that unique educational system which, besides maintaining a high level of literacy, also accelerates scientific research. As for research, I'll start in the usual way by choosing the stock exchange, because thanks to it, I'll have a chance at becoming an economic liberal. Then I research everything needed up to mechanical tools as well as the atmospheric engine. I disregard social research because the shogunate has such gigantic influence in Japan that I won't be able to reform this country in any way in the near future. Besides, I can't currently support any single social group separately. In the latest version of Victoria, they merge into political movements, which we can already either agitate or overthrow. Each political movement brings together members from various social groups who either support certain laws or oppose them. To me, it's an unnecessary complication, but you, my dear viewers, may have a different opinion. The significance of a political movement depends on the factors you see now: the number of members, their wealth, and how many of them are in the military. Each political movement can also have a passive, radical, or supportive stance. It's easy to guess what each means. If you have too many radicals, you're practically guaranteed a civil war. That's why my government is currently reforming to be as stable as possible and to increase the number of loyalists, which will help me in the future. As for my budget, I'm only imposing consumption taxes on services, moonshine, and cigars. Now I'll move on to the most important matter: how to build Japan's economic power. At the beginning, two provinces are the most crucial for Japan: Tohoku and Kanto. They have large populations and all the basic required raw materials. First, in the Tohoku province, I build 10 construction plants. No more or you'll go bankrupt. Then 10 logging camps. And finally, 5 tool factories. After that, all that's left is to issue road maintenance decrees, which speed up construction and improve infrastructure in the given province. As well as a decree on social mobility, because I'll need a lot of skilled workers here. That decree also grants greater access to education. And the third and final decree for this province is support for raw material production, which I'll probably later switch to industrial production. The remaining 500 authority points I have will be used to issue social mobility decrees in all my provinces with the largest populations. I also read on Wikipedia that these decrees support the development of literacy. All these moves were necessary for a peaceful economic playthrough of Japan. If, however, you plan to go to war, then in the Kanto province, add a military dockyard to your construction queue and move its construction right after the construction plants. As soon as the dockyard is built, queue up the construction of one frigate and also move it to the very beginning. Alright, now I'll deal with production methods in factories, farms, and so on. In the Japanese market, there's really a lack of access to basic goods, and the demand for luxury resources is minimal. That's why I set all my factories to produce only ordinary clothes, and I do the same later with furniture. And if you find yourself in dire need of luxury clothes, then switch one factory to produce them. I think that will be optimal. All my logging camps will also cut basic wood. Japan needs gigantic amounts of it in the early game. Fishing ports should use schooners because anyway I already have one civilian dockyard. I convert ports into industrial ports, and I also separate church and state in the administration. Areas of interest are Manchuria, and if you plan to go to war with China, then southern China. Otherwise, I would suggest Indonesia because most great powers have their markets there, which gives me the possibility to improve relations, at least with Great Britain. In fact, I immediately do this with Russia as well. If I manage to maintain +30 relations, they won't declare war on me. And for a rival, I declare Great Qing. Since I plan a war with China, the only law that might be useful to me is professional army. Besides, thanks to that, I'll have a more effective army. And yes, I had to bring the samurai back into the government. Now I wait 1 month for my spheres of influence to form, and then I declare war on China to liberate Manchuria. It might seem crazy to you, because China has an army 4 times larger than mine, but in reality it is only twice as strong. Right now, the current promotions on ENEBA are twice as strong, up to 20% cashback on all games. Additionally, 10% discount with the code LUCAS for my viewers. You just need to use the links below this video. This will also support this channel. I often buy on ENEBA myself, and I think I've only had a problem with the purchase once. And that was 3 years ago, because that's how long I've been promoting this store, so I recommend it. I am pretty lucky because I can hire a land army commander from the peasant faction. Overall, everyone is perfect, except for the shogunate. Moreover, this commander has some other cool qualities. I immediately promote him to marshal, mobilize the army, recruit conscription battalions, and call them all up. And when it comes to political warfare, from what I see, no one will support China in this war. That leaves me now waiting until the escalation process reaches 79%, because at that point most states declare neutrality and we can make additional demands. These additional demands will include transferring suzerainty over Korea and war reparations. China will sponsor the development of my economy. And now the next step is actually waiting. And unfortunately, if by January of 38 there is no British-Chinese war, i.e. an opium war, then I have no choice but to restart. I managed to trigger an opium war on the second attempt, so it happens quite often. But from what I can tell, I've encountered some weird bug. Suddenly my population stopped consuming grain and started demanding meat. Literally, the Japanese became obsessed with meat. And it seems they're even eating each other. Zombie apocalypse, year 839, colorized. So it's time to restart the entire playthrough. So once again, I declare war on the Ming to liberate Manchuria. I put forward exactly the same demands, but this time I'm lucky. Russia sides with me for a port in Korea, so it's probably worth it. After a short while, the British attack. I help them in exchange for a guarantee of independence for Japan. The amphibious landing of my almost 30,000 strong army is carried out by literally one ship in Manchuria. And I think I just proved that Rings of Power was indeed a well-crafted series. An alternative to the landing in Manchuria could be Korea, Beijing, or southern China. I'm literally choosing a region that has been completely abandoned by Chinese forces. My armies will target Beijing and Korea. I split my army in half and I send the smaller forces to capture Korea. And from my main army, I also pull out 10 conscription battalions and send them to defend Japan. China sometimes likes to launch a quick landing, and from what I can tell, this war won't last long, especially since the strength of the Chinese army is literally melting before my eyes. Then, once the British have finished the Opium War, I strike straight for the Chinese capital, where I win without much difficulty and occupy practically the entire metropolitan area. Ultimately, the Chinese capitulated, and I got literally everything I wanted. And so, this is one of the strategies for opening up Japan. Pretty good, because now I'm receiving a lot of money from diplomatic pacts that I can allocate to developing Japan. And this time, there's no zombie apocalypse. The Japanese aren't obsessed with meat. But now that Korea has been subdued, Manchuria liberated, the Ming humiliated, and most importantly, they're now sending me money, I can focus on improving relations with Korea, which is now the most important thing for me. Additionally, I will share my knowledge with them, which will make them more loyal, and I'll raise the fees for Korea. Now I'm earning even more, and I worsen relations with Manchuria. I reform the government to make it more stable and add a few, around 10, more building slots. And thanks to all that, I have a healthy 44 building points and 2 full production lines. In the meantime, a peasant political movement has also emerged. It's significant enough that it allows me to abolish serfdom and support agrarian reforms in Japan. Therefore, I revoked a few edicts and started supporting this political movement. As soon as the first tool workshops were established, I immediately began supporting them financially as well, until they supply me with roughly half of the tools needed for these logging camps. After that, everything will run smoothly without further financial support. Then I set up a few cotton plantations, 5 should be enough, and then I finally start on the iron mines. All these changes caused the construction cost of everything to drop from 52,000 to around 31. This is significant because, remember, in addition to the prices available across your Japanese market, there are also local prices for goods. For instance, for wood, this is the current situation in Japan. And my construction sites first source wood from Tohoku and only then import it at the lowest price from more distant regions. So basically, in the early game, it's worth centralizing the entire industry. The further you progress, the less significant this becomes. This is well demonstrated by the map when you click on the construction areas. It shows who is taking resources, from where, and in what quantities. With 3 mines, I produce almost enough iron to switch my tool production to iron tools, so then I can confidently switch all my logging camps to use iron tools. The next important stage in Japan's development is transitioning to iron constructions. However, to do that, I'll need to mine roughly 1,000 more iron, which is very difficult to achieve until I discover atmospheric engines. That's why I changed the research order, and now it looks like this. At the same time, I must not forget to satisfy the needs of my citizens. For instance, the demand for clothing is still growing, so periodically I'll add one clothing factory somewhere. These are the two actions I'll focus on for now. I set up 2 clothing factories, one in Kyushu and one in Chugoku. Not more for now, since soon I'll discover new spinning methods. Oh, luckily, an agitator from the peasant movement showed up supporting the abolition of serfdom. Let's see. I bring peasants into the government and try to abolish serfdom, although my chances of that happening are slim. I introduce new methods for producing furniture and sewing clothes, which results in the prices of these goods dropping in my market. Alright, I have my first coal mines. I immediately equip them with steam engines, and that allows me to introduce steam engines into my iron mines, making iron as cheap as borscht now. Well, I had a 60% chance of abolishing serfdom, and when everything was going well, all my aggressive expansion halted, and I was able to start a war with Manchuria. The Japanese economy began to get on track and develop. Then they appeared, the destroyers of good old isolationist fun, the Americans. And maybe the American army wasn't among the world's largest, because it was basically a tiny force, but it had one advantage: modern, repeating rifles and artillery, while all I had was at best a peasant militia. That's why, unfortunately, I accepted American investment conditions, which resulted in the Japanese market becoming as open as the Justice Fund. Thanks to that, I implemented free trade in my empire, and isolationism was overturned without a civil war. The shogunate itself will be greatly weakened, along with its political influence, while the power of the intelligentsia and industrialists will increase. The only real cost was an increase in social unrest. To some extent, this was due to exceeding my authority, which is why I decided to support the peasant movement. Then I brought the intelligentsia into the government in place of the shogunate. I hope this will allow me to pass several key laws. Since my borders were already open, I had to construct a few government buildings. Not too many, because I was still not very effective at collecting taxes. Unfortunately, I also had really bad luck, because in the Hokkaido province, they still hadn't found any gold. Usually by this year, I would already have 7 mines. Everything is literally going uphill in this campaign. After researching railways, I moved on to actions in the social sector, first catching up on backlog and then focusing on Japanese bureaucracy. As Japan, due to the inefficiency of the tax system, I have a huge amount of uncollected taxes, and I could use that money to develop the country. And no, the solution is definitely not to collect those taxes by constructing more administrative buildings. The administrative efficiency must be increased. I also revoked most edicts to accumulate authority points. This will speed up government reforms by 25%. As for factories, I am constructing the first steel mills and locomotive factories. Although soon I will have to slow down construction because I am starting to go into debt, and until I become a superpower, the interest on that will be significant. But back to reforms. I will start with the abolition of serfdom, which I managed to achieve after nearly 2 years of reforms. Alright, it wasn't that fast, but I'm still satisfied because abolishing serfdom will significantly improve the situation of poor peasants in Japan. Oh, their standard of living is rising so quickly. A month later, they are practically living like the middle class. To solve my financial problems, I will now focus on appointed bureaucrats, as they will increase tax efficiency by 25%. The process of restoring Japan has also begun. Certain conditions must be met to receive truly powerful rewards. I was able to introduce bureaucracy very quickly, which had a positive impact on my budget. As a result, unrealized taxes have already dropped from 80,000 to about 50,000. The next step is to reform the economic system. Initially, I will go for agrarianism, as it will significantly increase the investment pool and won't face as much resistance as, for example, laissez-faire. I will build even more steel mills, more locomotive factories. Then I will also set up artificial fertilizer factories. This should eventually solve the food problem in Japan. For now, I still lack some fertilizers, but hopefully these factories will make up for it, and once I am producing enough locomotives, I can implement public transportation. Now, I am preparing to introduce the per capita tax, which will only slightly improve my financial situation. But the central archive will definitely help. Currently, I am already not collecting only 38,000 in unrealized taxes. This is the right moment to build administrative buildings in areas where I am not yet collecting taxes. I am also modernizing production methods in my factories. And before implementing more modern governance in my country, I need to increase paper production because I will soon be in dire need of it. In my construction sectors, one by one, not all at once, I am switching production methods from wooden to iron structures. This is because I just paid off my entire debt and don't want to accumulate more interest. Essentially, 5 years of reforms have caused Japan's economy to skyrocket, along with the quality of life for its citizens. A new social movement has also emerged: Japan's modernization. This movement will allow me to create a modern industrial state. I have also significantly increased my construction capabilities and I am still running a budget surplus, so I am starting to build universities. Oh, racial segregation has been introduced. In this game, that's actually good. Even though universities don't increase literacy in the state, they do affect the pace of professional qualification for agricultural workers, allowing factories to find workers more quickly. That's why I am building up to 2 universities in each province. Besides, they will also increase Japan's innovation rate, which is currently only at 50. Not great. The maximum I can achieve is 175, which is a really good number. The higher the innovation, the faster we research new technologies. By the way, is it worth introducing a public education system in Japan? I finally discovered more modern boilers, which will solve my resource issues. I will need significantly less iron and other raw materials. So now I can start constructing more factories, for example, tool factories. And once again, I am running short on grain. Sigh. The honorable restoration is about to be completed. The shogunate has fallen from power and Shogun Komei has restored the political primacy of the monarchy. This handsome guy. This momentous occasion marks the end of a centuries of shogunate rule in Japanese shogunate and heralds a new era of modernization and reform. The shogun must choose his political allies carefully. And honestly, I will be seeking support from industrialists to industrialize Japan as quickly as possible. If you thought this was the end of Japan's modernization efforts, you were mistaken. Japan now has 3 more major tasks ahead: eliminating the samurai and creating a professional army, ending the Sakoku era, Japan's period of isolation, industrializing Japan. Once these 3 reforms are completed, Japan will embark on the path of imperialism, which may not necessarily be welcomed by the world. The capital has even been moved to Tokyo. I am also founding Japan's first company, Mitsui. Besides increasing the efficiency of all these industries, it will also significantly strengthen the power of industrialists. Now, I just need to take actions to make these buildings more efficient. Without prosperity, we won't get company bonuses, and in the worst case, a company might even go bankrupt. Let's check the average profitability of each industry. For fertilizers, it ranges between 10 and 12. For mines, it's between 6 and 9, the worst. And for textile mills, it's between 9 and 17. I'll start by improving production methods for clothing, as it will be the easiest way to balance the production of both regular and luxury clothes. The second way to improve these companies' efficiency is by lowering the cost of basic raw materials. Ultimately, the company will earn more, but I see that I have a massive problem with tools. In lead mines, they're also an issue. So I'm building more tool factories to lower their price. The third method is to start exporting clothing, lead and fertilizers, which will increase their price on the local market. Even though the exported amounts aren't huge, every bit helps. And now, just when my economy was starting to struggle due to a lack of tools and ships for trade, it finally happened. I got a gold mine in Hokkaido. For now, only 5 gold fields, but once they start operating, it should generate an additional 10 to 15,000 in income. I'll use that to expand my construction capacity. Next, I had to choose which path Imperial Japan would take. I could strengthen my relations with other empires worldwide, but why would I do that? That would worsen my relations with Korea, and personally, I'd rather improve them. Because by doing so, its independence will decrease much faster, leading to higher tribute payments to me. Meanwhile, I had a small revolution. They've already surrendered. Now I'm introducing a public healthcare system. The industrialists won't be too happy about it, but so be it. Finally, after 30 years since conquering Korea, it has become my vassal. Alright, I admit it took me way too long. Normally it should happen after 15 years. Now they're paying me a bit more money. I was also looking for a good opportunity to attack Manchuria, but Russia kept intervening in the war, so I won't be able to proceed without modernizing my army. Fortunately, I just introduced public healthcare, so I'll now focus on fully developing the institution. But I'm going to need a massive amount of administrative points. Looking at the situation, I realize I'll have to build a lot of administrative buildings. At its first level, this healthcare system gives me an annual population increase of 350,000. I wonder how much that will be once I upgrade it to the maximum level. Next, I'll work on opening Japan to migration, which will actually please the industrialists. And it looks like I made a major mistake by not building those bureaucratic institutions much earlier, as they've significantly increased my income. Of course, just when I thought everything was finally on the right track, GDP was growing, I was making money, the population was increasing, and my country was stable. A volcano erupted. Let's send some aid to my neighbors. Luckily, as Japan, I wasn't hit too hard. Everything will only decrease by 10%. I'll use this moment of national tragedy to change the voting system, and since I also have quite a few capitalists, I'll introduce wealth-based voting. Oh, turns out I didn't have as many capitalists as I thought. I also started large-scale port construction since my port limit has increased. More ships mean my trade routes will be more competitive and can expand further. Meanwhile, my healthcare system has reached its maximum level, effectively doubling my population growth to over 600,000. That's quite a lot, actually. Now I'm constructing many universities to finally catch up on research. Honestly, I messed up here. I have 100 innovation points, but I could have 169 right now. Since it's now 1880, I'm focusing on researching all the fundamental production methods I still lack, especially dynamite and improved steel refining. Then I'll move on to steel construction, which will significantly accelerate economic growth. At the same time, I'm already constructing buildings for military production to modernize Japan's army. Now I'll be able to rearm my entire military at once, making it one of the largest in the world. Honestly, I didn't want to do this in smaller steps. Yes, classic Victoria mechanics, 100% chance of passing a new law, and of course it fails. It passed on the second attempt and it even changed my flag. Time for the first vote. It looks like my population is growing so fast that my current education system in Japan can't keep up, so I'll need to establish public schools. I'm upgrading my infantry to line infantry. Let's see how much my military costs will rise, since until now they've been almost non-existent. Although, when it comes to military advancements, I think the technology will spread naturally. In the meantime, I'm introducing laissez-faire economics even though it has little support. Unfortunately, I don't have any agitators I can invite to help with that. After modernizing the Japanese army and equipping it with modern infantry, I also recruited artillery units, and after switching to more modern training methods, it led to the fall of the samurai. Unfortunately, this will slow down my military research and the samurai will lose their bakufu ideology. However, reforming Japan's army and moving away from samurai traditions has proven to be a great benefit for Japan, specifically for Imperial Japan, because now I'll gain claims on Korean territory. Unless you prefer the other bonuses, which are pretty weak. Next, I'll modernize Japan's arsenal. This also marks Japan's full recognition on the world stage as a great power. This is a unique mechanic for Japan, as all other nations must defeat a great power in war to achieve this. This process can be accelerated by establishing embassies in existing great powers, but only true great powers, since, for example, I can't do it in Egypt. After introducing laissez-faire, I can establish a third company, and this time let it be the clothing one. I make a lot of money from that. Now I'll focus on building a fleet because it primarily brings me the most prestige points, which will give me a bit more influence, and of course at that moment I had to be attacked by Great Britain. In reality, they only demanded investment rights from me, so I backed down and agreed to peace. Because until I build my fleet, I have no chance of winning a war against Great Britain, and the fleet is still under construction. Right after that, I researched construction based on steel frames, but unfortunately I can't implement it immediately because I lack some steel and glass. Because of this, I'm spending a fortune on construction, so I'll switch to steel-based construction very slowly, step by step. Once my army is ready, I set my sights on Manchuria. Unfortunately, it has shrunk a bit. And luckily for me, none of the great powers are defending Manchuria. I must admit, sending my army into battle is quite costly. This war should be won without much trouble. After the war with Manchuria, I surpassed the 100 million GDP threshold, making the Japanese Empire the third largest economy in the world. And it's possible that soon it might even be the second. The funniest part is that I still can't afford an army. And I did it, a new trade and navigation treaty. Signed earlier this afternoon in Washington, this landmark treaty officially abrogates any previous unequal treaties between the United States and the Empire of Japan. This means that the United States has now recognized Japan as a major power on the international stage. And the might of the Japanese Empire jumps from 11th place straight to 3rd. And after implementing another tax reform, I might finally be able to afford an army. Thanks to this, I now have the money to build the Japanese fleet, or rather 3 fleets. With them, I can safely defend Japan's coastline. I'll be honest, I only established my power block in 1900. I completely forgot about this mechanic. Well, I won't be too original with the name. I'll play this as an independent empire because I still plan to acquire a few more subjects. And as always, when I was finally on the right track to challenge other great powers. I had the money, 3 armies, even modern ones, and 3 fleets, which were also modern. Nothing stood in the way of my conquest of the world, except for Japan being on fire. Literally, all of Japan was burning. It turned out that as pollution increased, there was also a chance of wildfires breaking out. Yeah, I only noticed that icon during editing, so I have no idea what they do. But I set everything to automatic construction because I won't be dealing with these while waging wars. At this stage of the game, the automation system works quite well anyway. Japan is too strong of an empire to fall. I just won't automate farms. I'll only build them in Manchuria. I don't want them in my own territory. In 1904, I declared war on Russia as a test. I want to reclaim Manchurian territories. This war should be very winnable since Russia is much weaker than me. I don't think any other great power will support them. Each of my fleets has 4 admirals, and I assign each of them a different strategy based on their specialties. 2 fleets will guard the coastline and 1 will remain in port. For now, I'm deploying only 160,000 of my soldiers in Manchuria without conscript battalions. I do see Russian troops moving toward the front, but there aren't many of them. From what I can tell, my army has a statistical advantage in attack power. Thanks to this, I'm inflicting massive manpower losses on the Russian forces. This gives me an advantage, even though I have fewer battalions deployed. In fact, I'm dealing twice as many losses as I'm taking. To speed up the war, I'm attempting a somewhat risky naval invasion. Risky because I have to sail across half the world. I'm literally landing in the Baltic states. And maybe I can make a quick push towards St. Petersburg. I love when countries have their capitals near the coast. Meanwhile, in Manchuria, I pushed back the Russian forces and took everything I wanted. The naval invasion worked quite well. The Russian troops are retreating from Manchuria. There's practically no army left here. This AI in Victoria is so dumb now. Well, no matter. March on St. Petersburg. It turned out that 50,000 of my soldiers could easily defeat a Russian army 6 times larger. And after 6 months of fighting, my small army inflicted so many losses on the Russians that I even started gaining the upper hand near St. Petersburg. And reinforcements have just arrived. And really, after taking the capital, all that was left was to make my demands. Incredible! The Russians lost about 1.5 million soldiers in this war, while my losses were significantly lower. And as a result of this war, I also took Persia, because why not? Oh, and in the meantime, the Chinese Empire collapsed. Maybe I can take advantage of that. It turns out I conquered Manchurian territories at the perfect moment because something unexpected happened. I simply ran out of workers, and I had to take some very controversial steps. It was time to introduce property rights for women. The funniest thing is that instead of granting women rights, it was actually easier for me to integrate 40 million Koreans. Of course, this won't happen without a war at this stage, but the Koreans realistically don't stand a chance. An additional bonus of conquering Manchuria, and honestly I didn't know this, was that there are tons of gold mines here. And now I'm building them. First, I'm building an administration in Korea to collect taxes from millions of Koreans. Besides, integrating Korea itself will cost a lot of administrative points. And since I plan to build factories here, it's important that Korea becomes an integral part of Japan. I find it amusing to see how my population look dressed and happy compared to the Korean ones. And right after stabilizing Korea, I introduced the first women's rights laws in Japan. And I think I did it so late that feminism won't even trigger. An opportunity presented itself, the Prussian-British War. I decided to support Prussia, and yes, I know I won't gain anything interesting from this. My real goal is to test my fleet and army. And of course, the best training is in battle, though it's turning out to be quite expensive. I don't think I'll have trouble defeating the British fleet. It looks like I have a qualitative advantage. I might even manage a landing. Okay, I just won my third battle against the Irish. It looks like I'm having an easy time because the British forces are in Prussia, crushing the Germans there. I feel completely cheated. I had just managed to land and Prussia ended the war. Oh well, in the meantime, I integrated Korea into Japan. It took 5 years. And it's clear that its conquest and integration had a positive impact on my GDP. The war with Britain clearly showed that I have a rubber shortage. I need to secure some. And it just so happens that Sumatra has plenty of it, huge plantations of 28 each. And when I seized Sumatra for my vassal, France declared war on them. And I'm not part of this war, so I'm probably about to lose all my gains. I definitely don't like that. So I declared war on France, and this time I'll take that province for myself. I sent my fleet to blockade the entire coastline, and I'll use my 90,000 strong army to seize those territories. It just so happens that my Japanese fleet easily defeats the French ones, so they won't be sending reinforcements, and I'll take over this area as quickly as possible. It's kind of funny. France is still using sailing ships. War goal achieved, France is handing it over to me even before the war ends. But before I finish this war, I have a question for you, my dear viewers. How do naval blockades work here? How should I position my fleets around France to completely cut off their market? I'm counting on your suggestions. In Kansai, I finally managed to launch the Metropolitan Railway all the way to Kyoto, and I'm continuing to switch my entire railway system to electric trains. You can already see the first electric trains running. I also finally solved my grain supply issues. I just started importing large amounts from a poor country like America. Oops, I accidentally unlocked feminism. I've also created 2 new fleets that will be focused on destroying convoys. And yes, I have submarines combined with destroyers here. I'm very curious how these fleets will fare against British convoys, which must be sailing here. I can see they have provinces in China. And honestly, I'd like to drive the British out of here. For my submarine fleets, I've also hired admirals specializing in convoy raids. And let's be honest, I'm running out of workforce again, while China has plenty. Before going to war with the British, I'll first support the Americans in their war against Venezuela over the oil fields. They started it earlier, and I'll use this opportunity to take Hawaii, which currently belongs to France. I must admit, switching to a wartime economy is boosting my GDP. It's practically a vertical line going up. I take Hawaii without much trouble and it falls under my occupation. Then I sent my army to land in Venezuela and capture the main objective of this war. As long as the French don't show up, the Venezuelan armies won't be much of a problem. Meanwhile, the French exited this war, allowing me to take Hawaii for myself. Now, I just need to defeat the Brazilians, not much of a challenge either. At the same time, I'm testing my submarine fleets by destroying Brazilian convoys, though I'm not sure if this tactic actually hurts Brazil in any way. Ultimately, the Japanese forces occupied all of Brazil, securing victory for the Americans since they were busy turning Scandinavia into their puppet, literally. This war brought me some key advantages. My submarines will now effectively destroy trade routes. I overtook Great Britain in GDP quite a while ago, yet the British Empire is still supposedly the strongest in the world, mainly because of its navy. I annexed Manchuria into Japan. I formed an alliance with the United States. They might be useful in the upcoming war. And I'm attacking Britain to liberate India. America joins the war practically without my call. They must really dislike the British. Besides India, I'll also try to free other large British-controlled countries. I think this will cut off Britain's resource supply, leading to the country's collapse. And maybe, over time, I'll even take over those cheap resources myself. Luck was on my side because a Franco-British war also broke out. And before the war started, my fleets had already positioned themselves on all of Britain's major trade routes, ready to attack convoys. Wow, I think I just started a pretty massive world war. Look at this, literally everyone is fighting, and even Russia is on my side. From what I can see, I'm really destroying British convoys. The only question is whether it's enough to fully blockade their trade. I also managed to land in Ireland again, and I immediately set my war goal, London. I have to admit, the British forces are a tough nut to crack, and my numerical advantage is what's making the difference here. I'm fighting on both sea and land, already pushing into mainland Britain. Britain's GDP has dropped by 50 billion, but that's not a huge amount. After some time, the British sent reinforcements to England and started resisting. But in the end, they're still losing. I think this is mainly because I have field hospitals and pretty solid methods of replenishing losses. And despite the British having a threefold numerical advantage, they are taking twice the casualties I am. Look here, this means their divisions are running out of manpower. Essentially, the British are fighting with empty divisions. Thanks to this, I'm winning battle after battle. And I think my naval blockade of Great Britain is finally working. Or maybe it's just because I occupy 90% of their country. And even though Germany has capitulated once again, my armies have reached London and are already fighting for the city. I even have a tiny bit of American support. After London falls, I just have to wait for Britain's surrender. Just before the end of the war, take a look at the casualties. Britain is taking significantly higher losses everywhere. My army, despite being 3 times smaller, is actually comparable to the British forces. And there it is, victory! Many countries have been liberated, effectively ending British imperialism worldwide, and at the same time, it has started Japanese imperialism, because now no one can match this country. My GDP is almost twice as large as the second place nations. I wish I had another 100 years to play as this Japanese empire, expanding it across the entire world. Though Japanese influence already stretches globally. And if you enjoy videos where I create powerful empires, I recommend this episode about France, where in just over 100 years I built a 1 million-strong French army and achieved global hegemony.